Hi everyone, welcome to North and South Podcasts. This is Tim. Today I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to talk to you about mindfulness, meditation, and acceptance, and how that is part of the life that we lead that is within our control. So we view the world through a lens that we control, even though we can't control the external world. And there are people who often say, "Oh, I don't follow politics or big issues or big social issues because it frustrates me. I can't change anything." And if you are mindful and look at the inner world and get yourself right, then that's the best you can do. And to some extent, that's right. But at the same time, we cannot give up on creating a better world. And we do that by, getting ourselves right and developing ourselves, and then joining groups and looking to collectively push forward to achieve progress, which again can be defined in a number of different ways by a number of different people. But there are a lot of people who say things like the news is depressing, and it is. I restrict my intake of news. I read papers at the weekend to read essays and analysis. I also listen to select podcasts which aren't trying to wind me up. They may be entertaining, but they're talking to me about real issues. And I also will speak to people and catch the odd little bit of news here and there about particular political issues that might be considered more global issues, etc. Because I think it's important to be informed, but it's also important not to be inundated. And part of that is information overload and also what might be called nonsense and lying overload, which is when we listen and watch things which wind people up with lies. Let's call them lies, that's what they are. And also stuff that is there to just give us little dopamine hits or hints of dopamine hits that make us feel good for a few seconds but don't provide long term fulfillment, etc. And I've spoken about this before and I've spoken to other people about this. Doom scrolling and going through your phone at night instead of reading a book or just meditating or just relaxing and going to sleep. I never enjoy scrolling through my phone. Yeah, I sometimes do it because you check a message and next thing, there you go. Next thing you go down a rabbit hole. Time goes and then you realise, well, that was a bit of a waste of time, wasn't it? Chasing some kind of imaginary contentment online or whatever. It's nonsense. Now, we know that a lot of people out there are trying to pull the wool over our eyes and are trying to get us to behave in a certain way, to buy products, to vote for them or whatever. And we often let them do it and subscribe to their philosophies because it makes life easier. So we interpret the world through particular ideological viewpoints. And more importantly, I think fear of the other side, where if you say to someone, how can you vote for a party led by Boris Johnson, they might say, "Oh, I didn't like the other fella, I didn't like Corbyn or whatever," to justify it. And oh, how can you vote for a party led by Suella Braverman and with Lee Anderson and all these people in? Oh well, I don't believe in people self-identifying as cats, which I read in a particular newspaper, which is a load of nonsense, by the way, that story. Those kind of things. Apparently, there was a debate in a room about gender identity, and someone in the class said this story about someone identifying as a cat, self-identifying as a cat, and the government and the Prime Minister have commented on it and said, "Oh, this is a big concern," etc. Turns out someone said, "Can I identify as a cat?" And it turns out that the teacher said, "Well, no, that's disrespectful because you are making out that people who identify as a particular gender are just making that casually or trying to be absurd, etc." And that was basically the top and bottom of it. And again, this culture war nonsense, which a lot of people are getting wound up by, it really doesn't help this country. when we have culture war nonsense. Yet there are people who, for reasons of identity politics, and people on the left who go too far, but to use that to justify the kind of nonsense we're getting now by a party that knows it's not going to win the next general election, so just needs to spin culture war. We don't want to end up down Americanized levels of culture war, which is very, very easy to go down if we're not careful. So the inner world is important, but the outer world is also important, and we need to be vigilant and make sure that we don't have our societies turn into things that we don't want. And again, a lot of that's down to opinion, but by the same token, there are a lot of societies in the world I wouldn't want to live in, according to the veil of ignorance argument put forward by John Rawls, who said that before we place ourselves in any imaginary society, we need to imagine that we won't know where we'll be in that society before it's set up. It's called the veil of ignorance argument, and it's very, very powerful. And if you said to me randomly, where would you like to live in the world, etc., there are some interesting debates. So, for example, apparently, if you ask people on the street, countries like Ireland and countries like Mexico score quite highly, even though, Ireland's got problems with the cost of housing and issues with its economy in recent years, the young feeling that they have to leave the country, etc. And Mexico's got a lot of social problems, economic problems, political problems, problems with drug wars, etc. However, both of those countries, I notice, have got, strong Catholic churches, and maybe there's a bit of a unifying thing there in those countries, even though you might not consider them to be high up on the charts for satisfaction, day-to-day satisfaction for people. But if you look at the Scandinavian countries, which usually come out on top of those kind of charts, I would much rather live in, say, a Scandinavian country, using the veil of ignorance argument, than, say, the United States or one of the powerful economic powerhouses, as it were, such as China, etc., because you really don't know who you are going to be and whether you can gain access to healthcare and whether you have got any say or control over your life. So, interesting arguments, but I do believe in mindfulness and spiritual development, personal development, but I also think that we need to go beyond that and try to join organisations and form societies and do our parts in societies. Like Aristotle said, the good life involves getting involved in the day-to-day realities of the polis or the city-state as he saw it. And I think global society today, we need to be involved. We can often feel disempowered. That's because we often are disempowered. But it's about turning that around, not giving up, but also being realistic about what we can achieve and not letting things get to us too much when we can't control certain things. But anyway, that's just a little bit of a important issue for me. We all need to switch off and relax, and watching news and getting wound up by things all day isn't good for us. We need to do things like exercise, meditation, yoga, watching a film, reading a book, getting a bath, getting a shower, playing with your child, going out with the dog. Those kind of things that just get you in the moment as much as possible. And mindfulness and meditation and spiritual and personal development, that's all a part of that. There's a famous picture of a Buddhist monk setting himself on fire, which is the cover of the first Rage Against the Machine album. And I always find that a very interesting image because Buddhists, anti-violence, etc., but it doesn't mean that you just give in to things. You do need to stand up for your beliefs, and what that Buddhist monk did in South Vietnam in protest at the Diem government at the time, which was full of corruption, was trying to impose a foreign religion on a Buddhist country, and was also in hock to the United States and its foreign policy. That Buddhist monk took a stand and sacrificed his own life for something that was very, very important to him. And we need to control our thoughts, we need to control our words, but we also need to take responsibility for our actions and act in the world. Sometimes it's very hard to act in the world, to be the one who stands up and says, this is wrong, this is intolerable. Even in democratic societies, peaceful protest and people who stand up for issues which the mainstream don't want to look at, that's very, very important. And I think that's part of being a mindful person as well. You need to be mindful about creating a better society for our children and for future generations. And as the Manic Street Preachers said, if we tolerate this, then our children will be next. Part of this moving forward and progressing as individuals, as groups, as societies is there are less evil paths that we can take. And sometimes people say, oh, we can't have perfect societies and you can't have everything, etc. And you're absolutely right. But we do have the lesser of certain evils, and sometimes you need to choose the lesser of certain evils in making progress. So as a person, you're not going to just wake up tomorrow and give up all your addictions in one go and work on all your faults in one go. You've got to work on things. You've sometimes got to compromise on certain things. I know people who try to give up smoking and then they go, they went from smoking a lot to trying to smoke none. And people who try to give up vaping and they go from vaping to not doing any vaping the next day. You've got to stagger it. Sometimes you need to take a path that isn't perfect but is realistic. I think one of the ideas of mindfulness and being a good person and working on yourself is achieving what Buddhists might call the Buddhist mind, the pure mind, the mind that doesn't allow negative situations to dominate their thinking, that they've always got clear thinking in pursuing the right path and doing the kind of things that are important to them, and remembering that we are human, but we shouldn't accept certain limitations just because other people have got those limitations or you've had limitations in the past. Yeah, you can be grounded in reality, but we can do better. And even when the rest of the world isn't interested or when other people aren't interested, you can always do better for yourself. Today I went on a Buddhist retreat, and I went on a couple of Reiki retreats last year, which were 2-day and 3-day events with Kevin Morris, who's been on the podcast before. And I've been interested in meditation for 3.5 years. So today, me and my girlfriend, we went to this Buddhist retreat at the Kadampa Meditation Centre in Liverpool, and it wasn't an expensive course. We were there for 3.5 hours. There was a bit of lunch provided and drinks provided, and we did 3 sessions that involved long, deep meditations and involved talking about things, some of which I've just shared with you. But I've introduced a little bit more of a political angle as well. Each day we need to be realistic about what we can achieve as individuals, but we also need to be hopeful about what we can achieve collectively. And I remember reading one of Barack Obama's books about this rejection of the idea that we're all just these individuals, this kind of Ayn Rand, I am just an individual. We're not. We drive cars as individuals on roads paid for by everyone. We do things that impact on everyone else. When things happen to us, we rely on the expertise of other things to keep us alive, to keep us going, to get food on our plates. This idea that we're just isolated, atomized individuals and that there's no society is an absurd notion. And we've got global problems and global issues. So the threat of nuclear war, the threat of potential AI issues in the future, which I've mentioned on another podcast recently, the threat of global epidemics, the threat of inequality, and I think inequality in the post-human age, where we may have people who are able to access technologies and processes that can keep them alive for a lot longer than others, etc. We have big issues with that already that could worsen. Global warming, etc. Again, putting aside all the conspiracy nonsense about things like COVID and global warming, these are big issues that individuals by themselves aren't going to be able to deal with. And I always find it interesting when you look at the top levels of political parties who believe in the cult of the individual. They're often very wealthy. And I think we can do better than that by having these people the top of our electoral systems and people voting for them as well. But what does it say about our supposed democracies when they're dominated by wealthy people who go in and then become wealthier and get paid off by vested interest? Just doesn't sit right with me. And you can moan about people trying to get into the country on boats till your heart's content, but the very fabric of our governments in supposed progressive liberal democracies, there's a lot of vested interest that has a big say on how things are done. So don't give up the fight for better societies, better communities, get involved in things. Yeah, we can't do everything, we need to be realistic. But by working on yourself and working on your mindfulness and your equanimity and your calmness and making yourself better daily, that doesn't mean we turn our back on the world, because the two sides of the same coin. We exist in the world, and without the world and without others and without our societies and our groups, individual humans won't get very far in life. Thanks for listening. Cheers.